The room had been prepared for a calm royal statement, but Prince William did not arrive to preserve appearances. Standing only feet from his father, with senior household officials and national broadcasters waiting beyond the doors, William delivered an ultimatum. No heir had ever spoken publicly to a reigning monarch. King Charles had to either remove Camilla from all influence over the crown or surrender the throne. Then William stepped back, leaving his father to answer before the nation. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles stared at his son as though the words had shaken him. He had entered Buckingham Palace's state dining room expecting to announce a limited reshaping of royal duties. The room, normally reserved for state occasions, had become a stage for crisis because cameras were active and senior officials were waiting nearby. Cancelling the address would not hide the conflict. It would only confirm it. William did not look away. The Prince of Wales, the title held by the direct heir to the throne, placed a sealed constitutional memorandum on the table and slid it toward the king. The document established formal limits on Camilla's authority over succession planning, household appointments, and access to state papers. "This cannot be postponed again," he said as the silence deepened. Camilla maintained her composure, determined not to reveal fear. Then the future king spoke only to his father, refusing even to glance toward her. That silence hurt her more than any accusation. Music. She understood the message. This was no negotiation with the queen consort. Charles alone had to decide. The monarch reached for the royal folder, but his fingers paused over the seal. William revealed that senior household members had signed a declaration refusing to serve under any arrangement allowing her private influence to shape the next reign. A royal household declaration was a written pledge stating the conditions under which officials and family members would continue their duties. The challenge came not from one frustrated son, but from an organized alliance prepared to act. Charles felt humiliation, heartbreak, and fear collide inside him. His heir was not merely questioning his judgment. He was prepared to end his reign before the nation. The red broadcast light remained steady. No one moved. No one came to rescue him. Camilla finally broke the silence. She looked at William and asked where the princess and had helped organize the confrontation. His expression never changed, but that alone gave her the answer. Yet William's ultimatum had not begun in that room. The people surrounding Charles had been carrying private wounds long before the cameras started recording. Music. To the public, it appeared to be a battle over royal authority. Inside the family, it was something far more personal. William was not simply confronting a sovereign. He was standing against his own father, the man whose approval he had spent years trying to earn. Charles was not merely defending a queen consort. He was protecting the woman for whom he had sacrificed reputation, trust, and peace. Between them stood Camilla, fully aware that one man's victory could destroy the other. William had prepared himself before entering the room, but preparation had not erased the guilt. Minutes earlier, he had stood alone in the adjoining corridor, quietly repeating the opening words of his ultimatum. His hand stayed steady, yet his breathing revealed the pressure he carried. Then he removed his wedding ring, held it tightly in his palm, and remembered the price duty could demand from a family. When he slipped it back onto his finger, the future king understood there could be no turning back. Charles recognized the deeper danger almost immediately. Every unresolved controversy during his reign would eventually pass to his son, and every private arrangement hidden from public view could weaken the institution William was destined to inherit. The succession referred to the legal transfer of the crown from one sovereign to the next. But this conflict reached far beyond inheritance. It involved who could influence appointments, confidential planning, family wealth, and the structure of a future reign. Camilla watched her husband closely. Years earlier, after their marriage, he had promised during a private recorded conversation that palace pressure would never again be allowed to humiliate her. She remembered every word. The queen consort did not ask him to defend her publicly, but the expectation rested heavily between them. To surrender her authority would feel, to the monarch, like admitting the life he had fought to build had been a mistake. William carried that burden as well. He understood his demand might permanently wound his father. Yet remaining silent would mean accepting a system he no longer trusted. The memorandum did not ask Charles to leave his wife. It required Camilla to surrender access to succession discussions, royal appointments, family trusts, and regency planning. A regency was the temporary exercise of royal authority when a sovereign could not perform official duties, making her exclusion constitutional rather than personal. Charles finally noticed the handwritten initials on the sealed cover. Princess and was not present, but her signature confirmed she had reviewed the document and fully supported its terms. The king's expression hardened. His son had not acted in sudden anger. The challenge had been carefully examined, coordinated, and prepared with remarkable precision. Camilla watched the realization spread across his face. Somewhere before that night, William had stopped believing private persuasion could solve the problem. One incident had changed everything, and Charles now realized that the public ultimatum was only the result. Behind William's controlled words lay one defining moment, an incident so serious that he stopped seeing the crisis as a family disagreement and began treating it as a threat to the crown. The crisis had begun 3 weeks earlier during what should have been an ordinary investiture rehearsal at Windsor Castle. William arrived expecting to approve the final order of the ceremony. Instead, he discovered that Camilla had quietly instructed the household to remove 2 of his constitutional advisers from the front delegation and replace them with officials personally loyal to her office. The adjustment was subtle enough to escape public attention, yet significant enough to reveal who believed they could shape the next reign. William examined the revised procession list twice before speaking. His senior constitutional adviser and Catherine's private secretary had both been removed from the principal receiving line without consultation. Their replacements were officials who had previously supported expanding Camilla's influence into the future king's household. The prince walked toward the empty ceremonial dais and confronted the master of the household. The official attempted to describe the changes as ceremonial balance, but his confidence faded under questioning. A master of the household was the senior official responsible for organizing major palace events. Yet even he had not created the revised order. He finally admitted that the instruction had come directly from the Queen Consort's office and had received Charles's private approval. William folded the procession list once and carefully placed it on the chair reserved for him. "Restore the original order," he said. "Music. This ends tonight." The official nodded, but the future king understood that the ceremony itself was no longer the real issue. Music. Someone had tested whether his authority could be quietly diminished, and his father had allowed it. Charles dismissed the concern later that evening. When William confronted him during a private recorded conversation, the monarch described it as a simple seating disagreement and accused his son of allowing old resentment to distort harmless decisions. William left without raising his voice, but the dismissal stayed with him. The king had not merely refused to listen. He had transformed a constitutional warning into a personal grievance. Shortly afterward, Catherine met her husband and handed him a copied scheduling note. It showed that Camilla's office had requested authority to review future household appointments after the current reign. The princess immediately recognized what the document implied. Influence was being prepared to outlast Charles himself. She watched William's frustration harden into determination and realized their family could no longer avoid the consequences, and confirmed the danger through a documented account of an earlier private meeting. She had warned her brother months before that such an arrangement would create 2 competing centers of authority, but he had refused to address it. The Princess Royal now agreed that private persuasion had failed. William asked her to review a constitutional memorandum. This time, the decision would be formal, public, and impossible to delay. 3 weeks later, the altered ceremony had evolved into a national ultimatum. And when father and son finally stood face to face, neither was willing to retreat. Charles finally broke the silence, but he did not answer the ultimatum. Instead, he accused William of turning a family disagreement into a public act of defiance. The heir never raised his voice. Music. He stepped closer, looked directly into his father's eyes, and said the rebellion had begun the moment private loyalty was placed above constitutional responsibility. Camilla pushed back her chair. The sharp sound echoed across the room, causing everyone present to turn toward her. Charles stood motionless, hurt by the challenge and furious at the way it had unfolded. A sovereign was the reigning monarch, expected to rise above personal pressure and preserve constitutional stability. He warned that no heir could pressure a king into submission before the nation without weakening the crown itself. William replied that the institution had already been weakened by hidden influence, divided authority, and decisions no one was willing to explain publicly. Music. Camilla stood and urged her husband to end the broadcast. She wanted the cameras switched off, the doors closed, and the family dispute returned to private silence. The Queen Consort saw fear in Charles's eyes because defending her now could cost him the throne. Yet surrendering her authority would break the promise he had spent years trying to keep. William kept his tone calm. The future king said the monarchy could not ask for public trust while concealing who shaped succession plans, appointments, family trusts, and access to state papers. When Charles called the demand cruel, disloyal, and driven by old wounds, William's expression tightened. The mention of Diana struck deeply, but he refused to let his mother's memory become an escape from the present crisis. Charles grabbed the constitutional memorandum and shut it with force. A constitutional memorandum was a formal written proposal defining how royal authority should operate within established rules. William calmly reopened it and turned the signature page back toward him. Music. The gesture was measured, but its meaning was unmistakable. Anger would not erase the terms. The heir then read the binding condition aloud. Charles could remain king only if Camilla signed an immediate renunciation of all advisory influence over succession, appointments, trusts, regency planning, and William's future household. A regency allowed another royal to perform sovereign duties when the monarch could no longer do so, making control over its planning critically important. Camilla felt a wave of fear when William revealed the endorsements. And had signed. Edward had signed. Catherine had approved it. Music. The senior constitutional secretary had also given formal backing. This was no longer one son confronting one father. It had become a united stand from within the royal family. Charles demanded to know who had granted William such authority. The prince met his gaze and answered, "The people who will bear the consequences when you are no longer here." Yet the document resting on the table was only the visible weapon. The real balance of power depended on those who had already decided what they would do if Charles rejected it. William appeared to stand alone, but the ultimatum carried the strength of an alliance Charles had failed to notice forming around him, and had drafted the constitutional language. Catherine had documented the interference. Edward had secured the support of senior working royals. Even the king's private secretary had warned that the household could not survive with two competing chains of command. The final decision belonged to Charles. But almost every pillar of royal authority had already shifted beyond Camilla, and had drawn a firm boundary long before the confrontation. She did not oppose Camilla as Charles's wife, nor had she ever asked her brother to abandon his marriage. But the Princess Royal, the traditional title given to the monarch's eldest daughter, refused to accept any arrangement allowing a consort to influence the next sovereign's household after the current reign. For her, the danger was straightforward. Two competing voices claiming authority would eventually divide the family beyond repair. Catherine held the evidence. She had preserved scheduling records, appointment revisions, and documented accounts showing how her advisors and charitable initiatives had repeatedly been altered after informal pressure from Camilla's office. The Princess of Wales understood why those seemingly minor changes mattered. Small interventions left unchecked could eventually become permanent control once William inherited the throne. William remembered the private meeting before the broadcast, and had faced him without hesitation and warned that he could not step back simply because Charles looked wounded. She told the future king that hesitation would not heal the family. It would only bury the conflict and make it even more dangerous. Even now, she waited in a nearby chamber, gripping the back of a chair as her brother's voice echoed beyond the closed doors. Catherine asked the question William feared most. "Are you prepared for your father never to forgive you?" He admitted that he was not. Then he told her that becoming king meant accepting wounds that could never be fully healed. She heard the pain beneath his composure and realized that his success might cost him the relationship he had spent a lifetime trying to protect. The private secretary stepped forward and placed two identical cream envelopes beside the royal seal. A royal seal was the official mark confirming that a sovereign's decision carried formal authority. One announcement confirmed Camilla's withdrawal from royal influence. The other transferred sovereign responsibilities to William, while Charles moved toward abdication. Charles looked from one envelope to the other. Then he noticed that palace security had already restricted Camilla's access to the private record suite. Music. The secure rooms where confidential state and family documents were kept. The machinery of the monarchy was already moving as though her authority would end that very night. The king finally understood. Even his closest office had prepared for the possibility that he would refuse. With every alternative already in place and the family united, Charles could no longer postpone the decision. But the first consequences arrived before he had spoken a single word. Before Charles gave his answer, the palace began responding as though the old order had already ended. Camilla's private staff received instructions to surrender their secure passes. William's advisors entered offices previously reserved for the sovereign's team. Telephone calls moved rapidly between Windsor, Clarence House, and Downing Street. Music. Then Camilla's equerry approached her carrying a small silver tray with her restricted access card. Music. She stared at it for several moments before realizing she was being asked to return it. Camilla remained motionless. An equerry was a royal aide responsible for personal duties, schedules, and official support. Music. Yet the man standing before her no longer looked like a servant. He looked like the messenger of an ending. She quietly asked whether Charles had approved the order. He answered carefully that the instruction had come from the Constitutional Secretary under emergency authority. Charles watched the exchange in complete silence. The Constitutional Office had activated a temporary protocol preventing both him and the Queen Consort from issuing any new household instructions until the crisis was resolved. That mattered because even one conflicting order could divide the palace into rival camps. William's team had also been granted direct access to the communication centre, ensuring that no separate statement could be released under Camilla's authority. Camilla closed her fingers around the access card and refused to let it go. The small piece of plastic represented far more than entry. It symbolized trust, influence, and the quiet authority she had gradually earned beside the king. Charles rose as though he intended to stop the humiliation. But William spoke before he could take a step. "This is what uncertainty looks like." The words landed heavily. The monarch finally saw what his hesitation had created. His wife was losing power before senior officials because he had never defined where that authority should end. Moments later, a senior aide approached Charles with a documented emergency briefing. It revealed that 3 senior household members were prepared to resign immediately if he rejected the memorandum. They refused to serve under 2 competing chains of command. Music. Camilla received another message only moments later. It was a handwritten note from Princess Anne. Respectful in tone, yet unmistakably firm. The restrictions would be lifted only if Camilla signed the renunciation. She could keep her marriage. She could keep her dignity. She could keep her ceremonial position. But she could no longer retain influence over the next reign. Camilla slowly removed the card from its leather holder. She held it between her fingers for a brief moment. Then she placed it gently onto the silver tray without looking at the equerry. Charles turned away, unable to witness the gesture that transformed his indecision into reality. The Queen Consort then looked toward her husband and quietly asked for 10 minutes alone. Her voice remained steady, but the request carried a deeper meaning. She might be preparing to make the decision Charles could not. The public confrontation had failed to produce an answer. But behind closed doors, Charles and Camilla would finally speak without advisors, official documents, or the protection of ceremony. For the first time that evening, they were completely alone. No private secretary stood beside the door. No heir waited across the table. No camera captured the silence between them. Charles told Camilla he was prepared to reject William's demand, even if it meant losing his throne. Camilla listened without interrupting. Then she quietly removed the Queen's brooch from her coat, placed it beside his hand, and softly said, "You will not lose the crown to prove that you love me." Charles stared at the brooch, feeling the full weight of her words. To him, accepting the ultimatum would seem like proving every critic right, everyone who had once insisted she never belonged beside him. For the king, resisting was no longer simply about protecting influence. It had become the final defense of their marriage, their choices, and the years they had spent enduring public judgment together. Camilla reached for his hand but did not soften the truth. A royal renunciation was a formal surrender of constitutional authority, not a rejection of marriage or personal status. She reminded him that William was not asking him to abandon his wife. He was asking for a clear boundary between her place beside the monarch and her influence over the next reign. Charles confessed that he feared surrender would appear as shame. He imagined the public seeing it as proof that their life together had weakened the monarchy. Camilla answered quietly that the greater shame would be allowing the crown to suffer because neither of them could let go of authority. Love, she said, should never need a throne to prove itself. Then she revealed something Charles had never expected to hear. She admitted that the Windsor intervention had been a mistake. She had believed replacing the advisors would preserve continuity, but now realized those decisions belonged to William and Catherine. Her attempt to protect stability had crossed the line into control. The atmosphere in the room shifted when she opened her handbag. She removed an unsigned document and placed it in front of Charles. Anne's earlier warning had prompted her to prepare it weeks before, but she had hidden it because she hoped Charles would establish the boundary himself. Its wording went even further than William's memorandum. It permanently removed her from succession planning, household appointments, private trusts, and every aspect of the next reign's administration. Camilla picked up Charles's fountain pen and signed the document. Her hand trembled for only a moment before becoming steady. She gently pushed the signed renunciation toward him and left the brooch beside it. Charles asked whether she would still stand beside him after the announcement. She looked directly into his eyes and answered, "As your wife, always. As an authority, no." Then she quietly walked through the side door, carrying her grief with her while leaving Charles the crown. When the king returned to the waiting room, he held Camilla's signed renunciation in his hands. Within moments, the nation was about to learn whether her sacrifice had preserved his reign or changed the monarchy forever. At precisely 9:17 p.m., King Charles stepped before the cameras alone. Behind him, the royal standard still flew above the palace, but Camilla's chair had disappeared. He announced that the Queen Consort had voluntarily surrendered every advisory role connected to succession, royal appointments, family trusts, and the future household of the Prince of Wales. Across Britain, the meaning became clear almost instantly. Charles had chosen the crown. William had succeeded. And Camilla had protected her husband by accepting the boundary he had refused to establish. Charles delivered the formal statement with a controlled voice, although every pause revealed the strain he carried. The royal standard, the flag indicating the sovereign's presence, remained flying above Buckingham Palace, confirming one undeniable fact: he would remain king. William would now assume expanded responsibility for long-term constitutional planning and the future structure of the royal household, ensuring that no competing influence could shape the next reign. Buckingham Palace released Camilla's signed statement only moments later. She would continue her ceremonial and charitable responsibilities, but she would no longer hold authority over succession, appointments, family trusts, or the administration surrounding William's future reign. Music. The Queen Consort had not been removed from the royal family. She had simply been separated from power. William watched the announcement from the adjoining room without any sense of victory. Catherine quietly reached for his hand as his father confirmed the decision before millions. The future king had secured the constitutional boundary he believed the monarchy required. Yet he also understood that he had forced Charles into the most painful public decision of his reign. Victory had arrived carrying the weight of heartbreak. Camilla listened alone from a private sitting room. When Charles described her decision as an act of service to the monarchy, she gently closed her eyes. For the first time that night, she allowed herself to cry. Her authority had ended, but her sacrifice had saved the man she loved from abdication, and entered shortly after the broadcast, carrying the brooch Camilla had left behind. Without ceremony, the Princess Royal placed it back into her hands. The gesture carried a quiet message. Camilla had lost political influence. She had not lost her place within the family. Outside Buckingham Palace, crowds gathered beneath the illuminated balcony as newspaper headlines spread rapidly across their phones. A split image of Charles and William appeared beneath one headline: "The King chooses the crown." The crowd fell silent while a reporter replayed the announcement through loudspeakers. One young woman slowly began applauding. Others soon joined her, not in celebration over Camilla's loss, but in relief that the monarchy had avoided a constitutional collapse. Charles ended the broadcast and quietly asked William to remain behind. The public decision was over. The private wound was not. The nation had received its answer. But the true meaning of that night would be decided in one final conversation between the king who remained and the son who had nearly replaced him. When the doors finally closed and the palace fell silent, Charles and William stood exactly where the confrontation had begun. The cameras were gone. Camilla's chair remained empty. The signed renunciation rested beside the royal seal. Charles did not thank his son. William did not apologize for the ultimatum. Instead, the king asked a single question: "Would you truly have taken the crown tonight?" William met his father's eyes and answered, "Only if you had already abandoned it." Charles absorbed the response without looking away. He admitted that his son's methods had been severe, but he could no longer deny the constitutional concern behind them. A constitutional order was a formal written directive defining how royal authority should operate. The monarch acknowledged that personal loyalty had blurred boundaries that should never have become uncertain. Love had influenced his judgment. The institution had paid the price. William made no claim of victory. He told his father he had never wanted abdication. He had never wanted to replace him that night. The threat existed only because every private warning had been delayed, softened, or ignored. Music. He explained that he had brought the matter into public view only because silence had become more dangerous than confrontation. Charles answered with quiet sorrow. He admitted that trust had been damaged and forgiveness would not come easily. William accepted those words without argument. The future king said the crown sometimes survived through decisions a family could never make gently, even when those decisions left wounds no ceremony could erase. Camilla returned and quietly stood beside her husband, not in the chair that had been removed, but close enough for Charles to feel her presence. William thanked her personally for signing the renunciation. The Queen Consort replied that he had been right about the constitutional boundary, but wrong to believe she lacked loyalty to the monarchy. She had surrendered influence because protecting the crown mattered more than defending her pride. Charles picked up the pen and signed the final order, formally transferring long-term succession planning and future household authority to William. The king kept the throne. Camilla kept her marriage and ceremonial dignity. The competing chain of command came to an end, and stepped forward as the official witness. The Princess Royal lifted the second sealed envelope, the prepared abdication statement, and tore it cleanly through the middle. No one spoke. The gesture confirmed it would never be used. Charles handed the pen to William, then briefly rested his hand over his son's before letting go. It was not forgiveness. It was acknowledgement. That night, King Charles chose the crown. Camilla chose her husband. William chose the duty waiting for him. Although the family would never return to what it had once been, the monarchy emerged with its future secured, its authority clarified, and its stability preserved. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video.